Andy Bateman has spent 30 years leading and advising global organizations. He's led teams and created purpose, mission, and values for organizations at top companies, even advising the Australian government. He's also held global leadership roles in marketing and has been the CEO of various creative, research, strategy, branding, digital, and marketing communications firms. Andy is truly special, a mentor and a friend. I hope you enjoy our time together. Hey, y'all. Let's go there. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I've been excited about this. You know, we were introduced by a mutual friend, someone whom we both love very much. And it's funny, when I met you, I was in a bit of a fragile state, if I'm being honest.
You had a leather jacket on, I remember. You had your armor on.
I had my armor on. But I didn't fool you. We met for happy hour at ABBA.
That's right.
It was the middle of South by Southwest. I was less than a month removed from a big job that I'd suddenly stepped down from. And I was sitting across from you, and you held me in tremendous kindness. And you gave me some of the best advice I've ever received. And it was the most perfect advice I could have received at that point of the journey. And the thing that you said to me that really made a mark, and you recently said it to me again, was perhaps this is the time where you're no longer a mountain climber, but you're actually transitioning to explorer.
Yes.
And that is really how I've treated the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, I love that. You know, it was a quote from George Bernard Shaw, the writer, who said, obviously written a long time ago, he said, men, especially old men, should become explorers, not mountaineers.
Yeah. And that really resonated with me. And that is really what I took to heart over the next couple of years. What I didn't know when we reconnected recently, I want to say was it about a year ago? We reconnected about a year ago. So midway through this process, you and I had been on the same journey unbeknownst to one another.
Yeah, that's true.
And going through the same dark night of the soul, through the same kind of self-examination. What is this all about? What is this all for? Gone through some of the same processes to get to the very same answer. And we were shocked. We were finishing each other's sentences. What was that about for you? What was going on in your life?
It started for me in probably October of 22. There was something wrong. I was the CEO of a group of agencies, and I've had a long career all over the world and all of that. And I was blaming everybody else. I was kind of like, I'm not happy. It's the business, or it's my boss, or it's my clients, or my bloody employees. The Gen Z, people who just want everything, and the coffee's never good enough. So I realized that something was wrong, and I was doing the flailing about. I was externalizing it. In the following February, I'd agreed to separate from that company, and my wife Kate said to me, because I said, "Look, I was I think 55 at the time, and I said I probably got one more big job with me, and then that's it." Right? And she said, "Really? The kids are gone. They've got their own lives. It's just us. Do you really need to do another one? Why?" And it stopped me in my tracks because that came at a time when I realized that the problem was really me, and that I was not feeling the same about career, about ambition, about the mountain. It was not for me anymore. And it was almost like, you need to take your own advice. And so it caused me pause. And from there, I kind of decided that there might be some work I need to do. I might need to find out who Andy is.
Who Andy is without the CEO title, without
exactly
all of the recognition.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that was a big driver was I was absolutely, can I swear as well?
Of course. I love a good swear word.
I was absolutely fucking determined that I would not be former CEO or former CMO in my LinkedIn
Oh my God,
profile.
like me. Yeah.
I hate that because it's kind of like, I realized that that's the job I did. It wasn't who I am. And so I was then left with, if you're not going to put that, then what will you put? And so that was a big question mark. Like, who do you want to be? So that was a part of it. And I think that at age 55, I now know that this is a period that is called the second launch from because I went back to school and learned to be a coach, right? But, and in coaching, they teach you that around about this age, we're given an opportunity. We're privileged if we have the opportunity for a second launch for what is the next 20 years going to be? What do you become? And as another quote that I love was from one of my coaches that said, you're in that process of replacing achievement with meaning.
I love that. Yeah, that's very true. And it's a hard adjustment.
It is, because on the one hand, there's a death, there's a grieving of my corporate career and everything that my identity I thought was wrapped up in. Turns out it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I very much can relate to that death and that loss of significance in I don't want to speak for you, but for me, it was loss of significance. I experienced loss of team, loss of purpose until I found my way again.
Yeah.
So what was your process? Did you go straight into that from coaching, or what was your process to begin to find yourself?
Well, a massively indulgent European holiday.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Well earned.
Greece, Italy, France, Sardinia. So I went away for 6 weeks. And I'd done a bit of consulting work here and there so some money to tide me over. So I wasn't worried financially. I had dinner with a friend of mine who runs a coaching / management consulting business, Darren. And we were having dinner. And he was asking me about my childhood and where I came from. And he knew I was in this kind of transition. And he said, Andy, I've sought you out as an advisor because I think you have tremendous experience and wisdom, and I wanted to learn from you. And I kind of was embarrassed by that. And
what made you embarrassed?
Well, I said, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve any of this. I mean, it's just been a series of strange events that kind of led me here. And I was in denial of any sense of wisdom. I think that was one part of it. But Darren pushed on this word deserve. He said, what if we could replace that I don't deserve it with I do deserve it? He said, how many more people do you think you could help if the narrative was different about who you are? And that stopped me in my tracks. And I realized that if I changed my internal narrative about who I am, then I could start genuinely a new chapter of life where I did different things for different reasons. And so I decided that I needed to do, for the first time, I'd never done any therapy or anything like that. I rode my bike. I thought that was my therapy. But I decided that I need to do some work on who I am and find myself, my identity, in order to move forward. And so I went and did a thing called the Hoffman process, which was incredible, painful.
Yes, super painful.
But also, exhilarating. In fact, a friend of mine who's just moved here had a drink with last night. She just finished Hoffman.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she had this brightness.
The glow. She had the glow, the post-Hoffman glow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did something similar called Groundbreakers, but it's a very similar program. Tell our listeners what Hoffman is for people that don't know.
Well, Hoffman is about personal transformation. It's been going since the year I was born, actually, 1967. They have about 14 centers around the world now. It's Jungian philosophy. The point is that we have patterns that we inherit from our parents, and we inherited them for a very good reason, which was to mirror our parents, which is how we built a bond and a connection with them. As young as 18 months old, our patterns are set.
Wild.
And they served you very well in those early years because you were bonding and finding love. But by the time you get into your 50s, they perhaps don't serve you quite as well.
Yeah, at home and at work.
Absolutely. And so it starts with a cataloging of your patterns. I have 137.
Holy shit. Wow. Okay. I have not cataloged my patterns, nor do I think I want to, but I might need to.
It was kind of alarming. You think, oh, wow, these patterns really do rule how you behave and how you believe and your values. And that was another thing I kind of learned, was that, there's this idea that all of our values, all of our beliefs, we made them up. Yeah. We made them up to serve ourselves at that very young age. And if we made them up and we've built stories and narratives around ourselves that become our habits, that those habitual behaviors, if we made them up, then if we choose to change them, we can.
Totally. It's funny that you say this. I think I mentioned this to you, but I was at an event where a poem was read to kick off the event. The poem was by a Black poet by the name of Lucille Clifton. And she's a Pulitzer Prize nominee. She's a poet. She also wrote children's books. And it's a short poem, and it's called Won't You Celebrate Me? And the essence of the poem is she's talking about the fact that she had no models, yet she still had a very successful life and ultimately survived everything. And there's a line in the middle of that poem where she says, she talks about having no models, and she says, I made it up. Just like what you're saying. And I remember feeling so inspired by that, because in that moment I thought, holy shit, if I'm making it up, that means you're making it up. That means they're making it up. That means our spouses are making it up. That means we're all making it up, which then invites the question, what you're saying right now, which is, then what do we want to make up? If we're all just winging it, what do we actually want to make up?
Yeah. And if all of your beliefs you made up, then there's nothing that's fixed.
Right.
So if you choose to change, you can.
Right.
And that's incredibly enlivening. So Hoffman is a process of that transformation that begins with, you're not going to change anything about who you are unless you're aware of who you are. So there's an awareness component. That needs to get kind of expressed in some way. It needs to be written down. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be shared. You need conscious thought around that expression. And there's some physical thought around that too. A lot of the work in Hoffman is somatic. It's
emotional release.
Yeah, it's this idea that your body has stored every single memory that you ever had, and it shows up if you can start to get in contact with that. From that can begin the process of forgiveness, which was incredibly powerful. Forgiveness of yourself for your behavior, for your beliefs, for the things that no longer serve you. Forgiveness for what you've done to other people. Forgiveness for your parents for giving you those patterns in the first place. And then from there, you can start to develop a new way of being. So that was an incredibly cleansing process. And I found Andy.
Yeah. What did that do for your relationships, specifically for Kate and the boys?
Well, I think... Well, first of all, as far as Kate's concerned, I haven't fixed everything.
That's a good thing.
So it wasn't
more to work on.
A universal solution, unfortunately, because I rather hoped it would be. But no, it's with Kate, I think there is a level of clarity, honesty, and transparency about the parts of me that I didn't like, and my own ability to talk about them openly without feeling, and for Kate to talk about them openly without me feeling I've been criticised for that. Yeah. A gradual letting go of some of those beliefs and behaviours, and the creation of new ones. So it's created a lot more openness in our relationship. And also for me, because Kate had done her own thing very, very early on in her life, and a kind of understanding that, she's been through some shit as well. And we're all kind of fucked up.
Totally.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. That's actually one of the things I really want to shine a light on here, because I think so many of us are held back by our shame. And whether it's held back from what we actually want to do in our lives or achieve, or whether it's held back from intimacy, because we can't admit to ourselves or the people that we love that there are bits of us that we don't want to share with the world.
Yeah.
So I find that incredibly inspiring.
There's a wonderful book by Richard Schwartz. Did we ever talk about this?
I don't know.
Richard Schwartz is a psychiatrist, and he wrote a fantastic book called No Bad Parts.
Oh, we have not talked about this, but this book has come up over and over. I need to read this book.
Yeah. I recommend it as a audio book because it's very difficult to read. It's quite dense. Okay. But in it, Richard was a psychiatrist to people who were mostly imprisoned. So difficult characters, psychopaths. And he found that getting people to extinguish the bad parts, to suppress the bad parts after 15 years of therapy, working as a therapist, was uniquely unsuccessful. And so he began to experiment with this idea that, well, what if I had a conversation with those darker parts, those bad parts, and try to understand them? And in doing so, welcome them back. When those bad behaviors came up, like self-harming, just have a conversation with why is it that we self-harm? And what he found was, in particular for self-harming, was that behavior was about being present. That whatever bad was happening to me, I could be aware of my own self. So it's an identity. And while that was serving a purpose, while that person was perhaps being abused, it no longer serves a purpose. And so how do you then have a conversation with that part and say, well, thank you for trying to protect me, but I don't need you to do that right now. And he was finding that was incredibly successful. So rather than deny those bad parts, welcome them, have a conversation with them, understand them, give them compassion, and suddenly behavior starts to change.
So you're reminding me of an exercise that my coach gave me, and I wonder if it's based on this book. And it was a meditation in which you actually acknowledge the shadow parts of you. You love on them, you accept them rather than resist them.
Yeah.
You invite them in, you look at them, you deal with them, and they soften, they kind of dissipate when you actually do that.
Yeah.
And there's this other book that I read. Somebody introduced me to it a couple of years ago, and it's called Existential Kink. I can't remember if we talked about this one. And it has a similar concept where it says, it's the shadow side of us, the very thing that we complain about or resist, that we actually hold in place through that resistance. And that not only do we hold it in place, we get off on it because it's part of our identity. And so that was super fascinating to me, this concept of, if you accept that there are no bad parts, that it's all just parts of a whole, then it's much less daunting or intimidating.
Well, and you're not controlled by it.
Yeah.
So it just puts everything in balance, I think.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly helpful experience. And then I went straight from that into coaching, learning to be an executive coach with Hudson, which was a 9-month program, and I'm now a certified coach. And there are many, many parallels between the work I did at Hoffman and the learning of what it takes to be a decent coach. So that's been, that finished in late June. So that's really been a year's worth of work. And in doing so, a year's worth of figuring out what the fuck I want to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah. And so what do you want to do? You have a cool ass job right now. Let's just say that.
I have a few cool ass jobs.
Yeah, this is true. Well, one is for my favorite tequila.
Yeah.
I don't drink anymore, but when I do, when I have the occasional glass, it's definitely Lalo.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's that's kind of how we met, right? Because or were reintroduced because I'm the chief marketing officer for Lalo. I've been with them for nearly a year. It's been a fabulous business. Two founders, David and Lalo Gonzalez, who decided that they wanted to make, young guys, decided that they want to make a tequila the original way, no additives. And so they built this beautiful liquid called Lalo. It's a Blanco only. It's only made of 3 ingredients, based here in Austin.
Yeah.
And the third partner and also husband of David is Jem McDermott, who's CEO, and then Jeff, who's co-CEO. And they built this incredible brand and business. And so they needed some marketing help. So some of my time is spent with Lalo, helping to grow that brand, which is, a kind of timeless story of the liquid, but a very timely kind of brand, because it's got this kind of beautiful exterior and this purity to it and this naturalness to it that's very necessary, I think, in this moment. So that's one part of what I do. I've also launched a consulting practice with 3 of my former clients and great friends called Mixtape Partners. It's focused on strategy and strategy adoption in the marketing space, kind of like management consultants for CMOs. And we're all ex-CMOs and ex-consultants. And it's a really kind of pure business in the sense that we only want to work with people we like or love. I love that. And doing work that we love. We'll do one for-profit project and we'll all work on it, and then we'll do one non-for-profit.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I love that even more. That's excellent.
Yeah, because it's about, experienced people recognizing that experience is valuable, and let's find ways to give it back and pay it forward. And then I do a couple other little kind of consulting assignments, more like a quasi chair kind of role, and then I have a coaching practice.
Yeah, which I've heard you're enjoying quite a bit.
It's the favorite thing I do, I must admit. It's so rewarding to sit in front of another human and help them be there, be present, and help them strip the layers away of what is troubling them and find pathways forward.
Yeah. Isn't it though? It's the best feeling in the world.
It really is. And when you see those breakthroughs, which are often quite emotional for people, they usually never, the presenting question is never the issue. It's usually a career question that ends up being about who you are. And it's just wonderful. People say, what kind of coaching is it? And it's executive coaching, but in truth, it's about transitions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. Okay. I want to go backwards a little bit. I know we're going a bit out of order, but this is actually part of your story that I don't know. So I want to know how you became the soulful, interesting, super talented father, great husband, executive that sits before me today. How did you become Andy?
Well, that's a lot. There's a chronology that makes sense in retrospect, but was a series of random decisions.
Isn't that true for all of our lives?
I think it is. And I think that's quite nice. I think you manifest yourself and I said this to my kids, you'll never catch a cab. We used to live in New York. You're never going to catch a cab with your back to the wall on the edge of the sidewalk. You have to be out in the street with your arm up.
Right. You have to stand out.
Yeah. And especially when we lived in New York, there were no Ubers. It was yellow cabs, and that was a competitive sport in the morning. But yeah, I like to think that I was an opportunist.
Yeah. I love the metaphor. How did you grow up, Andy? Tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah. So my parents were very young when they met. My dad was in a band and my mum was a hairdresser, part-time model. And my dad was a salesperson, both very working class. My mum came from a mining town mining village, her parents. And my dad was a war baby. So one of the, I think, 4.5 million children born right at the end of the Second World War in the UK. And so he never met his parents. He was an orphan, born into an orphanage. Couldn't find them, tried all his life to find them. Was never able to find his parents, which I think has caused him quite serious sort of damage.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
That sense of abandonment, which was my pattern as well. So grew up, I'm the middle child of 4. I have an older sister and a younger brother and sister who are twins. And we grew up kind of poor. And not kind of poor, we were poor. But I didn't know at the time until I went to university, and I'm the only one of my family who did. So I went to university. I grew up in a place called Bristol. And I thought a very normal childhood. And then I got to university and find out there's all these wealthy people who had very different lives. So I was kind of thrust into this middle class environment where I felt very out of place. At the time, I had a Bristolian accent, which makes you sound like a bit of a farmer. I also had a lisp. So I spoke like this. Yeah, I spoke like this.
How did you correct it?
By practicing. Wow. By practicing saying S's at the front of your teeth. So I find myself in London with this, lispy Bristolian, yokel in amongst these people who've been to Harrow and all these great, places. And I felt distinctly out of place. So I think that was probably my first transition. Like, who the hell are you and who do you want to be? Because you're in this now blank space. And I remember coming back to Bristol after my first semester, went to the pub with my friends. We were all builders and plumbers and electricians. And they said, how do you like that London? And I said, I think I like it. I think I'm going to stay here. I don't think I'm coming back. And I remember distinctly one of them said, you can't do that because you belong here with us. So that was my first kind of realization that I didn't want that life. I wanted to run away from that life because I knew what it meant, because I knew their dads whose backs were gone because they were roofers. And, it's kind of a shit life. Yeah. And I didn't want that for me. I wanted to be in advertising, I decided.
Wow. So you knew at that young of an age?
I knew even earlier. Like I remember doing work experience when I was a kid. So I was 13 years old and I went to a friend of a friend got me, a week at an advertising agency at 13 years old. And there were creatives who were smoking and they wore leather jackets. And there was they won an account and they all went to this Italian restaurant and everybody got drunk. And I thought it was very glamorous.
Very Mad Men.
Yeah.
Post Mad Men era.
And I thought that would be great. I could have a go at that. But it was this combination actually of commerce and creativity that I found fascinating. And so I got a job in an ad agency at the end of my degree and called WCRS, which was a very famous agency, did amazing work. And I kind of fell in love with that industry, which is one of those, they call it a profession, but you don't need a professional qualification for it. But it allowed me to move all over the world. So went from London in the 90s to Sydney, 5 years in Sydney, various agencies, and then moved to New York as the head planner on Merrill Lynch and Kimberly Clark and Kellogg's.
Big accounts. Big logos.
Yeah, for J. Walter Thompson in New York. And that turned into various other roles. I ended up running Interbrand, which was a design branding company. Invented such brands as Viagra and,
no way.
And Bing. Yeah, we named Bing.
Wow.
But did some incredible work. And then I was at McCann for a while running the Intel business around the world, which was arguably the worst job in the world because I was in New York, the client's in San Francisco, and I had 750 people in 35 markets across 7 operating companies for McCann World Group. And so I sort of characterized it as I was wrong somewhere in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So you just lived on a plane. I've had those jobs.
Yeah, it was miserable.
It's so hard on the body and hard on the family.
It was. And in fact, I came home late one Friday, knowing that I was going to get on another plane on Sunday afternoon. And Kate said to me, the kids were young. We were in New York. She said, one day you're going to come home and ask where the kids are. And I'll say they're in college.
Damn.
That woman.
Yeah.
She speaks the truth.
Yeah, so, no kidding.
Yeah. So we absconded. The kids were like 11 and 14, I think. And then we absconded back to Sydney because we wanted them to be kids for a bit longer. And they weren't long for being kids in New York City.
This is interesting. We have a similar parallel here. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but if they were 11 and 14, they would have been the same age as my kids were when I took them out of school and enrolled them and traveled the world for the same reason.
Right.
I was burned out at work. I felt like I disconnected from them and I wanted to show them something different and for us to bond as a family. So it sounds like we did the same thing at the same time at our kids' ages. Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah. We haven't talked about that before.
No, we hadn't.
And how long were you in Sydney?
We were there for another just about 10 years.
Okay. So you stayed a full decade. So they grew up there in a lot of ways. Their later years.
Late teenage. And their university years were there. And we had a little beach house in Sydney. And I did various jobs. I ran a research and innovation company. I was the head of marketing at the largest telco there, Telstra. And I was at Deloitte. I was their head of innovation and national strategy lead partner. And so we did 10 years there. And then Kate, once again, she's the red thread through this, said, okay, I'm done. I want to go back to America. And this was interesting because Trump was president at the time, which was, really, America was a very unpopular place to be, in part because of that. And but America still held a fascination for Kate and I. And I don't care what you say about America, and a lot of people say terrible things about America. It still is a hotbed of innovation. It's a yes and market.
Yeah. And opportunity.
So we came back and we spent 5 years in LA, and that's kind of brought me to the current day. But I suppose when I look back, the red thread was I was always a strategy guy, even in leadership roles. My approach was, what's the problem? Let's interrogate it properly. Let's get to the bottom of it, and let's be creative about a strategic solution first, and then bring it to life, creatively. I was always a bit of a chameleon, I suppose.
It's funny, I've used the same term. Say more about that.
Going to London, not from London, having to find yourself at 18, moving from London to Sydney, being a Pom, they don't really like the British there. Having to assimilate.
Especially with your newfound accent.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, I didn't like to sound like a farmer anymore. It's a difficult country to arrive in. And then coming to America. And I remember one of my creative directors at JWT, you probably know him actually, Bill Hamilton, who was at Ogilvy and did Solutions for a Small Planet, right? Bill said to me, in order to survive in New York City, Andy, you need to become a caricature of yourself. And it was the biggest
truth. That's not entirely wrong.
Yeah. And especially in those days. And so
you leaned into it.
Yeah. And so there was always a kind of choice of who do you want to be? How do you adapt to different cultures, different people, different ideologies?
Do you think that presented the issue for you around your identity?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because it was, it's now a really popular thing to do because it was fluid, Right. But I think that in order to be successful, that in the short term, the adaptability, the chameleon-like part of you is very valuable. That's how you create connections and friendships, right? Because we have to find shared ground. But ultimately, it leaves, if you don't have a strong sense of who you are, you can just be a willow in the wind. So I think even though I hadn't done that consciously, I had always felt that there were some grounding parts of me that were constant. I was always very, very curious. I was always strategic. I was always why. I was that pain in the ass. Yeah, that's why. But I was really good at relationships. And I think that's in part because of having moved around so much. Kate and I ended up actually, and she's worse than me, but we've together have lived in 35 different homes.
Wow.
That's nearly one a year.
My goodness.
And she's more like 40.
Whoa. And I thought I had house horniness. That takes it to a whole new level. That's a lot of exploration together.
It is.
And how do you feel about that now? Do you feel the need? I mean, you just moved again.
Yeah.
So do you feel the need to establish roots, or does that keep everything fresh and dynamic for you too?
I think both, you know. I had a kind of meditation the other day. We've been in Miami for 3 months now, of which I've probably been there 3 weeks because of travel. And I really want to feel landed is the word I've sort of came to. But moving is addictive, and the thrill of that is addictive. And I think we both felt like we needed it. Our parents both died within 6 months of each other. Yeah, it was, my mum died just before 9/11. 6 months later, Kate's dad died. And then 9/11 happened and we were in New York. Our reaction, apart from, you know, the grief, was we looked at each other and went, fuck, you have no time.
No, life is too damn short.
Too damn short. And so you better go pack as much in as you can. And so I think we'd always been doing that, but we just put the accelerator down, and we're still doing it. You know, our friends are just aghast at us. We've just spent a lot of money on a beautiful renovation of a house in the Hollywood Hills. And just as we finished it, we moved to Miami. And they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Aren't you going to live in this house? And I said, thought we were, but we're going to Miami.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my most feared word is when people say, are you settled now?
Oh, goodness.
And I'm like, what do you mean? You must not know us.
What scares you about being settled? Because at the same time, you just said, I want to feel landed.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that means. And what is landed versus settled?
I think landed feels like home. Settled, what scares me about settled is the absence of momentum. Stopping. I'm going to have to at some point. I mean, we're not spring chickens anymore. But I actually think, you know, the exploration continues, and it's partly a motivation to continue to explore, and partly just the joy of, you know, just like leaving Bristol, there are many more places in the world that are wonderful. So I want to explore all of them.
Yeah. And what would it take what makes a home? What would it take to feel at home?
I think a bit of time, honestly, and some friends. You know, we're making friends in Miami. Kate and I would go to the opening of an envelope. You know, just making connections.
I'm going to steal that line.
Yeah. So yeah, I think making friends and finding some, not routine, but some regular things.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big cyclist, and I've found some groups to ride with. I've found some places to go. And, you know, just finding that kind of social network, I think, is going to make us feel a little landed. Yeah. We're coming into the season now in Miami, which is wonderful. You know, the temperature drops a bit, the humidity goes, and you got Art Basel, and you've got all the socialness of you know, people flying in for the winter. And so it comes alive. Yeah. But it's a great place. I love the Latin cultures that are there as well. And that's something to learn. I'm learning Spanish badly.
Okay.
You have a tutor.
Well, you'll have to practice with me.
Oh, please.
I'll be kind to you. I'll be gentle. Don't worry. Okay. And your accent is pretty good. I heard you just a second ago, even the way you said Gonzalez. I was like, okay. So Andy, to look at your career, I mean, it really is a really impressive career that's actually quite sexy. I mean, if you think about all the things that you've achieved and been a part of, when you look back at it, are there any big fuck ups? Are there any regrets?
Oh, yes. I think I could be accused of not sticking around long enough in some instances. And not because it got hard, because I did the hard stuff, but not sticking around for the rewarding part.
Oh, I'm the queen of that.
I don't really like, I'm no good just holding the tiller, right? And steady as she goes, it's not me. Don't hire me for that. Nobody does. But yeah, I think it would have been nice to stay places a little bit longer. Bit of tenure, would have made more money probably.
Yeah, no kidding.
Fuck ups though. I don't think there's so much fuck up as just really hard stuff. Intel was really difficult. You know, it's such a massive organization, such a complex business. And just finding a place for that brand in the world in an environment where all processors were basically good, all computers were basically good, servers, they're different, finding differentiation. That was a hard thing to do. There were a couple of, there was a business I ran in Sydney called The Leading Edge. I seem to have taken over businesses where the founders had gone and then needed their second launch. And I don't regret doing those jobs, but I could have found easier jobs to do, because founder-based businesses tend to build a house of cards where typically the founder's quite insecure and they built a business, and when they pull that out and move on,
everything falls apart.
Because the next layer of leaders aren't really that experienced and they're having to step up. The business has changed. It's perhaps past its initial kind of growth period, and it just becomes really hard. So I've done jobs that were just a slog. And in retrospect, I could have made my life a lot easier and my family's life a lot easier because I brought that stress home. Yeah. I think I was a good dad. I mean, I have a great relationship with my boys and with Kate, but I wasn't around enough. But, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And you have that time now to build a relationship with them. It sounds like you're all very close.
We are. Yeah, it's Team Bateman.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed about families that move around a lot is one thing's for damn sure, they have each other.
Yeah, because there's no support network.
Right.
None. And there's no long tentacle of uncles and aunties and grandparents. There was none of that for us. It was just the four of us. And yeah, so we are Team Bateman. It's very difficult for others to penetrate. And the boys both have girlfriends now, and I imagine that's not easy. Yeah. And we're not small, shy, retiring personalities.
Well, okay. And then so back to your coaching. One of the things I want to come to understand is you and I both have this burning desire at this point in our lives to pay it forward and to help others. And it seems to be to find meaning in our work. And what is it about that? What gave you that desire to help others? Because I have a sense that it's not something new, that it's something you've always had. So for example, the woman, Rachel, that introduced us said to me that you were her favorite boss of all time. That was how she described you. And as soon as I met you, I understood why. What is it about you that cares so much and wants to help people beyond just the work? And where did that come from?
It's a really good question. I hadn't realized the effect I had on other people. I wasn't conscious of it.
Really?
Mm-mm. I went to, a friend of mine retired last year, and I was invited to the retirement party. Mm-hmm. And I arrived early, and she was pretty early. And she said, before this gets started, she grabbed my arm. She said, you know, you changed my life. She said, I was at Merrill Lynch, and you introduced me to Thomson Reuters, and they changed my life. That moment changed my life. And I've had people over the years I had to make someone redundant when I was at Interbrand. After the 2008 kind of crash, and made 25% of the staff redundant, which really hurt.
It's the worst part of our jobs.
The worst. And one of them, a guy called Russell, I was walking across the street a few months later, and he grabbed me and said, Andy, and, you know, it's first thing in the morning. And I said, yeah. He said, you probably don't remember me. I said, I remember your face. He said, I'm Russell. I said, yes, yeah. He said, you made me redundant 6 months ago. He said, and I don't know if you realize, but the fact that you approved a year of healthcare coverage for me and my then pregnant wife, which you also didn't know about, meant that we could move forward as a family. And I went and sat in my office and cried a bit after that. And I went, shit, you don't really realize the impact that you have on people, good or bad. And I started to become conscious of that. I probably always was doing that, but it wasn't conscious. I just thought this is the right way to treat people. You know, part of it is my own curiosity for people. What makes them tick? Why do we do what we do? Who are we? And as a boss, that was my MO, because as a strategist, that's my MO. And so I don't think it was a conscious thing other than a curiosity for people that has caused me to do that. But yes, the work I did last year and the search for meaning led me to a really simple purpose, which was I want to help. And as you say, I probably always have been. And that's why I have good relationships. But I now feel an acute and profound sense of wanting to help. So my job at Lalo as CMO could be the swashbuckling lead from the front, you know, follow me CMO, but it's not. It's how do I help Greg? How do I help Trisha? How do I help Katie? How do I help, you know, whoever, to do their job better, to be really successful. And so it's really leading from behind. Yeah. And that has a whole other kind of reward. And helping people sounds like, well, it's not much of a purpose. Everybody should help people. But it's different when you put it in that context of leading from behind.
Yeah, it's like moving from operator to lever.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Operator is such a term that just kind of, for me, embodies all the things that maybe we used to be. But what you're describing to me feels very different.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it comes from you know, you don't have to pay me for it.
I love that.
You know, it's just something I get up with every day. And it's not like I walk around going, how shall I help you? But it's just a mode to be of, you know, walking into a discussion, a client meeting, a meeting of any sort, and saying, well, before I open the door here, what's required of me today? What do these people want from me? How can I help? And it's and the wonderful thing is I get to help people in every way, and I'm having conversations with people, even as a boss or a colleague, that help kind of navigates its way to you, the human, not necessarily you, the person or the operator.
Yeah, it's a very different approach.
Yeah.
So I have had so much fun and inspiration in watching you spin up this portfolio of all the things that you enjoy. And I find it extremely inspiring and informative to me, because I want to do the same. I want to build a portfolio of things that bring me pleasure, and I want to work with people that I love. And that's the key for me, this part. You did say something, though, to me about at the beginning of the podcast, and you and I have talked about this before, when you were told that you have wisdom to share, and you kind of like railed against that a little bit. And I said to you that Chip Conley once said the definition of wisdom is when compassion meets knowledge.
Yeah.
And I feel like that sums you up.
Well, thank you. You said that to me, I think it was 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And it's been a worm in my brain ever since.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chip.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. But no, I wrote something about it on LinkedIn the other day too. That when you take that apart, what's really interesting about that is that, was it when experience meets compassion?
When knowledge meets compassion.
Meets compassion. Mm-hmm. What's inherent in that is action, right? It's not a passive sharing of knowledge. It's not a passive accumulation of knowledge. The compassion part of it is sharing it in a way that is appropriate. It's metering it out, giving people what they need when they need it, sharing that part of it. And it was interesting to me to sort of meditate on that idea that wisdom is an act, right? It's not just a state of being. It's a way of doing and being. So I thought that, anyway, that's just my musings on it, but it really stuck with me. And I've struggled with the idea that I have wisdom because it feels really arrogant. And I actually have been coached on it by my cohort of coaches, because I talked about it. There's a duality in me. There's the impish, boyish, fun-loving Andy, who's kind of naughty, who I've learned to fall in love with again. That's what that was what I call finding Andy, young Andy. Mm-hmm. And there's this experienced, potentially wise Andy. And one of my coaching friends said to me, well, can't they coexist? Yeah. Wouldn't it be wonderful to welcome both?
Yeah, it's not binary.
No. And Howard Schultz, Keith Yamashita, who I worked with years ago, once said, people are more defined by polarities than singularity.
Oh, say more about that.
So we're both overachievers and insecure. We're both energetic and exhausted. we live in polar states. That's more defining of human beings than single things.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so I can be young and impish and wise.
Yeah.
And so I'm just coming to terms with and acknowledging the fact that, yes, I've done lots of things and that equates to wisdom, but only when there's compassion present.
Mm-hmm. And fun, apparently.
And fun. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely fun.
So if you were speaking to someone who's listening right now, who's starting to get that feeling that you got when you were a CEO and I got in my last job, which was like, this doesn't feel right. What piece of advice would you give to them?
I think take a beat. I mean, our natural inclination is to blame our environment. So resist that temptation. Not everything is your fault, but it is your responsibility. And so what are you prepared to be responsible for? If you're feeling some sort of way, if you're feeling that something isn't right, then what of that are you prepared to take responsibility for? Because if you don't take responsibility, you can't change it.
Wow.
If it's somebody else, then you can't change that.
Then there's no agency in it.
There's no agency, exactly. So yeah, I think just taking that time to accept some responsibility for what's happening to you, that the world is not against you, that you're doing it to yourself. And then begins the internal, slightly worrying, unraveling of who you are, to find who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I feel like that's not just career advice. That's relationship advice. That's life advice. I mean, you can apply that to any aspect of being a human being, a complex and beautiful and messy human being.
Yeah. I hate this idea of, work-life balance and my work self and my
Agree. There's no such thing.
It's nonsense.
Yeah. We're living the whole way through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally agree. Well, Andy, you're a gift.
Thank you.
I very much enjoy our friendship.
Me too.
I look forward to continuing to get to know you. I'm happy that our listeners are getting to know you and your wisdom. And thank you for indulging us today.
Thank you very much. It was delightful.